Welcome back to the SRA podcast. Recently, we spoke with someone from the National Lawyers Guild.
Hi there, my name is Javier T, and I am the Director of Mass Defense at the National Lawyers Guild. I also am a criminal defense attorney, and I represented a defendant in the Stop Cop City RICO and domestic terrorism cases.
So for listeners who aren't familiar with Stop Cop City, what is that?
So Stop Cop City in Atlanta was a social movement that was trying to clearly stop Cop City. Cop City was a multi-million-dollar project that the city of Atlanta pushed through behind closed doors to build a militarized police training facility in a forest in Atlanta. And so for many years, people across the world organized, took action against that huge project. The project was finished on the city of Atlanta side of the land, but the original plan was cut down significantly and the expense increased dramatically given the organizing and all the activism.
Could you take a second to explain what RICO is?
Yes, so RICO is a law, a criminal offense that exists in many states, but it's based on the federal RICO statute. And what the RICO statute was designed to do by the federal government was criminalize and prosecute what they call criminal enterprises. So basically criminal groups, right? Criminal organizations that do certain things, move money with a criminal mission. So in other words, it's like a big conspiracy with enterprise associated with it. Georgia basically copied the federal RICO, but expanded it so that it's looser. It requires less, and basically you can be accused of RICO in many more ways. And so how it works is essentially, they allege a criminal enterprise, and then they have these enumerated offenses, so specific criminal acts that turn it into a RICO. And in Georgia, there are so many offenses can be a RICO that there are just too many to name. And so what the state of Georgia did is they alleged that Defend the Atlanta Forest, quote unquote DTAF, was a criminal enterprise, and that these 61 defendants were a part of it and were advancing the criminal scheme of this enterprise organization. And so essentially what they allege is a RICO conspiracy, that all these 61 people conspired to advance the criminal enterprise's goals. When you start reading the indictment, however, it becomes quickly clear that it's hard to figure out what the enterprise is, who's a member, who's not. But generally, this is what the 61 were facing: an accusation that they were a part of this enterprise or in a conspiracy to advance its mission.
This kind of reminds me of the federal government's attempts to label Antifa a domestic terror organization. Do you think there are any parallels there?
Yes. Oh, 100%. The political prosecution in Georgia, I believe, was like setting a precedent and finding a way to prosecute activism, organizing, social movement with these laws. So I think it was a test case. Some would say it failed because it was a dismissal, but I think the impact and the way that it makes law enforcement think, yeah, we can find a RICO anywhere, right? Or we can find a conspiracy, we can find crime in social movements, has stuck. So yeah, I think there's like a historical line between what happened in Georgia and now these prosecutions.
So it sounds to me like their tactic is that if they can find one person committing crime within a political movement, they can go after the entire movement.
Yeah, I mean, I would go as far as to say that sometimes they don't even have to find a crime. Sometimes they just have to find an unpopular situation or a defendant that had a questionable history or a record. Yeah, I think that ideally they find like a very shocking accusation, but it seems that they don't even need that to create the RICO. I mean, the conduct that got people accused of RICO varied from like Venmoing each other, and they allege like zine writing and publication, which in itself is not, it shouldn't be criminal. It shouldn't be.
Hmm. So why were the charges dismissed?
It was a technicality, so the judge determined that the Attorney General's office didn't take all the right steps to prosecute RICO in Fulton County. Essentially, a RICO offense should be brought, and many other offenses should be brought by the local DA, right? The Fulton County District Attorney. The Fulton DA did bring a RICO against Young Thug, YSL, did bring a RICO against Trump. And so the argument that the judge agreed with was that the Attorney General should have taken more steps before prosecuting a RICO, because the Fulton County District Attorney is the one who's supposed to do that. And this is very common across states, that local district attorneys prosecute crime, and the Attorney General has very specific things that they can go after. So yeah, it was a technicality.
So this wasn't decided on the merits of the case.
At all, no. In fact, the judge avoided everything, all the facts, all the 50 plus other motions, all the other arguments, and dismissed it on a procedural jurisdiction issue. Even the judge's order is very clear, right? Like, the Attorney General can fix this, go do what you need to do and find another indictment, but this one just can't stand.
So what would need to happen before they could get another indictment?
Georgia law requires them to get a letter from the governor, from the Georgia governor, that then authorizes the Attorney General to prosecute this case. So it's not such a high burden or issue, but it does require steps and procedure.
So that would be conservative Governor Brian Kemp?
Yes. Or right now, yes.
If he proves a new indictment, would that be a signal of his support for police militarism?
I think that at its heart, the social movement was trying to stop the militarization of the police, right? The Stop Cop City movement was trying to stop the construction of this militarized training facility. So yes, if the governor agrees that these people should continue to be prosecuted years later after Cop City is built, it does seem that, yeah, there's this desire to continue this march towards militarized police. Yeah.
So how do spurious charges like this support the goals of the state?
So I think it's multiple goals. I think first, when you bring these extreme political charges, you silence a social movement, right? You paralyze it, you make it afraid, you make it paranoid. So there's that like practical outcome. If you indict 61 people of RICO, many, many people will now be afraid to be a part of a social movement. Then I think individually, it silences all the defendants, right? Like, even if we say, well, all these defendants are innocent, there are a lot of them who maybe had social media, right, had a voice in their community, were marching, rallying, and now with very serious criminal charges, they're silenced and they're surveilled and they have all these years hanging over them. On top of that, with extreme criminal charges to so many people, you end up having people turning against each other, cooperating with the government, and destroying relationships and social movements. And then, of course, with every political prosecution, it green lights another prosecutor in the county over, in the state over, right? Like, oh, I could do it, you should try it too. So it creates like a domino effect of more of them. And at the end, cases like this seem to be to stop activism and the struggle for justice. I mean, and people standing up for their rights. And so when the government disagrees with certain call to action, a certain ideology, the criminal system is used against them. And this isn't new or controversial. It happened all the way back to the 60s and so on.
Mm-hmm. It seems like this is catching on. I'm reading a New Republic article about Dario Sanchez, and it seems like this exact same thing is happening to him.
Yes. And Dario is one of the many Prairie Land defendants who I believe are the next test case for the federal government for these political prosecutions. I mean, it's the current one, it's happening in real time. And the consequences on Dario's life and on the other defendants' lives is, yeah, silencing, paralysis, neutralization, and then that dominoes on the rest of the community. Yeah.
So it sounds like authorities don't even need convictions to repress and oppress popular movements.
Yes. Um, I agree that the government doesn't really need convictions. There's a lot of people that say that the process is the punishment because facing an extreme criminal charge for years destroys your life, stops your political activity, and many of these cases, yeah, linger on for years and years and years. Um, with this reality, the government doesn't even need to bring you to trial because the goal has already been accomplished: silencing, neutralization, and so on. Um, you know, back in the day, I'm going to say not too long ago, 10 years ago, a lot of protest charges would get dismissed or resolved. People would do community service, get a dismissal. I'm going to say, and I noticed since 2020, the 2020 uprisings, the charges, even very small misdemeanors, stick around for 2, 3, 4 years. And so, yeah, this seems to be a pattern too, that what used to be resolved very quickly and dropped, oh, no harm, no foul, you were just rallying in a costume. Now it's extreme charges that last years. Yeah.
R.I.P. Frogman, I guess.
Yes, for sure.
What are some other tactics the authorities have used to suppress the Stop Cop City movement?
Yeah, I mean, they really used everything from the playbook all these years. There's the felony charges, there's raids, there's like random pulling over people, surveillance. They installed cameras in neighborhoods. They uh, served warrants and subpoenas to get evidence and personal documents. They were hearing jail calls. I mean, the list is so long. Um, there were raids in the forest encampment. There was, of course, the killing of Tortuguita while they were camping. So many tactics were used that I think are part of this like repression playbook. That yeah, the vibe in Atlanta, the confidence of the social movement was really attacked for years. Yeah, to silence it.
What should communities do? What's a community's best defense against this kind of unlawful retaliation by the state?
So, I think it's hard, but it does require bravery. It requires to continue speaking out. One of the strengths of the Stop Cop City movement was the fearlessness of pointing out that this RICO is bogus, that the domestic terrorism wasn't real, that Tortuguita was murdered, right? Continuing to speak about it and organizing about it. After the RICO indictment dropped, people on the ground still had what was called Block Cop City, right? Chronologically, the indictment didn't stop the movement from attempting, to stop the project. There was the referendum that was attempted, right? So many different tactics were used. And I think that is one of the reflections, right? Even the lawyering, the aggressive litigation, the response in every arena to the repression is what I think people should take away and be inspired to do. Um, One of the biggest goals of state repression is silencing, like I said. And so if that's their goal, then being louder means they're not winning, right? Um, and unfortunately, there are real material consequences that the government pushes on people, but the same support systems that people have created and are creating will keep people safe and will keep people out of jail and getting lawyers and having housing and so on.
So can we presume that the state's loss in court, this loss in court with the RICO defendants, will will it discourage further similar oppression, or is it, as you said, the process is the purpose and the machine is working exactly as intended?
Yeah, no, I think unfortunately, even recently, with how the Attorney General of Georgia has responded and how the federal government is pushing along with other cases, in some ways, I don't even think that they're seeking convictions and that they're seeking a day in court. I think, yeah, the goal is served through the prosecutions, the accusations, the incarceration, pretrial. Um, yeah, I think what the legal wins hopefully help though is to uplift people, right, and free them from these charges and get them to speak out more, right, speak out again. um, I see a lot of these legal fights as showing people with more clarity how outrageous the government is, right? So even though the process is the punishment, that process too can showcase, like, look, y'all, like this is really crazy. This is getting out of hand. We need to stop this. Yeah.
Yeah. And that takes a lot of money, doesn't it? Like calls from jail, commissary, court fees, lawyers fees,
Hmm.
loss of jobs and a loss of housing.
Yes. It is extremely expensive to survive like a serious felony. Um, yeah, there's just so many losses and uh, costs, not just financially, but yeah, mentally, emotionally, it can haunt you the rest of your life. The consequences of jail. Yeah, I mean, even if you get a not guilty or a dismissal, you already suffered all that. And there are people who end up suing, right, trying to recover, but then that whole situation can be re-traumatizing and another 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah. So what are some things communities have done to ameliorate that stress on defendants? And then a follow-up question, what has been the state's response to that?
Yeah, it's a parallel. So, communities have started jail support, bail funds, arrest hotlines, free legal clinics, expungement clinics, mutual aid distribution of food, of housing stipends, right? There's so many things that people are like giving each other for free, giving away. And then the state criminalizes it and says, nope, you need a permit to do this. You need a um, license to bail people out, and you need a registration to provide housing, right? Like a lot of times through bureaucratic requirements, the state stops or restricts mutual aid and solidarity with each other. But I think a lot of the um, defendants who live and remain free and see the light of the day are the ones that have so much support around them and are not forgotten and are, money's put on their commissary and there's fundraisers for their lawyers and their appeals. So that those are things that, yeah, anyone could do from anywhere, even in places where there are no, right, like political defendants, like high risk activism. The people there can support the ones 4 hours away who are facing that and who are getting incarcerated and so on. Um, in the Stop Cop City context, I always saw this massive solidarity, right? There's another defendant, get him out of jail. Here's how you write to them. Um, throw a fundraising show. Here's how you donate. And I think that model could be replicated everywhere.
What risk does someone run donating to something like a bail fund? Do they run the risk of getting a RICO charge?
Um, Nowadays, when the situation in the society, it seems that walking your dog can get you a RICO charge because if you end up at the wrong place at the wrong time, everyone gets criminalized. But I think that people should remain bold and fearless in supporting each other and providing each other aid. Um, Solidarity is not a crime, and if the government starts criminalizing us like helping each other, um, we should remember with our conscience, right? Like, wait, but I'm literally just giving water or helping someone not be incarcerated. What I'll say, like from a legal side, is that if there are concerns, yeah, having a consultation and figuring out a way to do it above ground will keep people safe. But unfortunately, as things evolve, even the most above ground legal, checking all the boxes could get prosecuted. We're living in very wild times. Um, so yeah, I think it's just continuing those strong relationships to keep each other safe in case anything happens.
Could you share with us a resource to get an affordable consultation?
you know, there is none. I wish there was a national legal hotline, but National Lawyers Guild does have chapters across the country, and we have members who are happy to consult, provide advice. And a lot of the times it's these like telephone games or referrals that eventually get people to some help. Many lawyers are happy to give free consults and free information. A lot of the times it's just getting those networks and getting connected. And that for me is like so important in what we're living through, that our relationships and our national networks will keep us safe. And so if we are not tapped in or have a friend of a friend of a friend, it might be time to like go to the book club, go to the library and make a friend and tap in.
So, you've mentioned that these tactics have had a chilling effect on the exercise of free speech, protected actions, community building, even. What would you say to people who may feel intimidated by these illegal state actions?
I think that technology has definitely evolved to the point where, yeah, it is a bit freakish and concerning to do much because um, a lot of things are being recorded and broadcast and so on. But I think what I would remind people is that humanity and civilization and society somehow like overcomes and like continues the struggle and is free, and there's this like millennia long struggle for liberation. Um, and in 20 years, when you look back what you were doing 20 years ago and you think about history and where was I in 2016, 2020, 2025, to remember like, well, I was hiding from flock, or I was scared to go to the rally, or when ICE came I locked my door instead of helping my neighbors, right? I think that's what I wonder if people can live with, um, because yeah, I mean, I think we're all trying to survive in capitalism, but we can't lose our morality, our values, our dignity, our humanity. And I think that's what happens when people give in to state repression. Um, they dehumanize each other and themselves.
So, I've heard you at prior speaking engagements talking about this idea of not complying in advance. Could you explain to me a bit of what you mean by that?
Yeah, so advanced compliance is this conduct that people do, that when something will be declared illegal, or there's a suspicion that there's going to be a new law, and this example is like uh, prescribing hormones to trans people, right? Like this is one example. Then people, before there's a law, before there's policy, there's a change, start stopping the conduct, right? So in other words, if there's this risk in 3 months, we might have a new law prohibiting this, the doctors go and say, well, I'm going to close my business. No more prescriptions, no more um, provision of care, because I'm going to comply in advance. This happens a lot in these protest scenarios where if the government criminalizes a bail fund or threatens to do it or threatens to pass a law, nonprofits and organizations and people say, oh my goodness, the risks have gone up. let me shut down my project, let me stop the funding, let me close my bank account, right? Even before anything happens, um, or out of fear that it'll happen to them as well. So that's what advanced compliance means. And the issue is that people doing this makes totally legal, normal conduct look suspicious, look guilty, look criminal. Um, the government will continue to repress and persecute a lot of us and a lot of our movements. But when you comply in advance and don't even, like stand up anymore, I fear like that the government has already won, right? The goal has already been reached. Yeah.
And there doesn't even need to be a law on the books to trigger this conduct, right?
Mhm.
Like you can be prosecuted on baseless, yet to be invented precedent.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the reality is that the government will continue their repression. We can't stop it, but complying in advance, I'll be honest, is what allows for genocide to happen and for broad mass destruction happen because people go quiet, retreat, get scared. Um, these mass injustices are prevented when people don't comply in advance and immediately start showing like, no, like this is necessary, this is good, this is humane. In 2016 and 2017, the federal government was prosecuting humanitarians on the border, right? Like people who were dropping off water in the US-Mexico border, no more deaths and so on. They refused to comply in advance. I mean, there was no law saying water is unlawful. Um, and they won. They won the cases, and I haven't seen a recent popular prosecution against them because they didn't comply in advance, right? They didn't wait for it to become illegal, and they weren't afraid of a prosecution. They opposed, and they continued their operations. Yeah, and people are still getting water. Yeah.
So, on the topic of not complying in advance, do community members gain anything by complying or snitching? I know that people get offered lighter sentences, better accommodations, or even just get nakedly threatened by the police into signing untrue statements, statements that support state narrative, right? Is there any benefit to becoming a rat?
One of the strongest defenses against repression is community and relationships. In fact, I think in this country, that is the biggest line of defense. Having people in your network, in your house, in your community that you can rely on, that you could go to their houses, you can call if you get arrested, right? Like having your people. When people betray each other or decide to take the side of the government, those relationships fall apart. And suddenly what was protecting people, protecting each other, goes away, and now everyone's vulnerable to repression. Um, and I think that is the bottom line. That cooperation with the government might have short-term benefits, if at all. Maybe there's short-term benefits, but long-term, like a life worth living, a community that remains together, families, friends that uh, are still with each other, might not happen anymore when someone turns to the government. Um, in the political realm, the way the government goes after dissent and dissidents clearly shows that they want people to betray each other and that they want people to turn on each other. I mean, this is such a uh, effective tactic from COINTELPRO, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, turning movements against each other. And uh, a very effective way is essentially to make people or force people or pressure people to cooperate, to make statements against each other. Um, and like a lot of people have a lot to lose. You're walking your dog, and then suddenly they say, "Oh, you're a terrorist. You were there. We got you." Those folks might not even be in the relationships that would protect them to begin with, right? They just happen to be there. Um, but even when that happens, the networks that do exist, the people that do care, would still show up for that dog walker. Might take a little bit. If that dog walker decides to cooperate with the government, they won't get the support and they'll stay in the same really bad situation. The last thing I'll say about cooperating is that the government has the power, they have the upper hand. So if someone cooperates, it's possible that they will always be in that position for the government, that they always will be required to cooperate, inform, snitch at, the snap of the fingers. And so it's like a long-term, lifelong risk potentially with maybe short-term benefits.
So I went to a community event where the speaker was another movement lawyer, and she said something that was I found quite memorable, such to the effect of when you become a rat, you end two lives. First life you end is the victim whom you may be sending to jail, prison, whatever. But you also, in a way, end your own life, or the life you had, because you're ostracizing yourself from your community. What community is going to want to hold a relationship with you if you are like an active danger to your community? So, I mean, good luck returning to your old life.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I've read of instances of judges sentencing collaborators harder than non-collaborators. Is this something you've seen in your career at all?
Um, yes, I mean, when you say I'm not guilty and you say I'm not talking, the government has the burden of proving everything against you, and sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It's a mishmash. When you say I'm cooperating and I did it, like you already have such a lesser advantage. And then if the government's like, yeah, they did it, they told us they did it, and we're not going to give them anything in return, no breaks, no favors, you've set yourself up for that. Like, yeah. Um, I've heard anecdotally stories of people who get convicted, right, found guilty, still serving similar sentences, similar prison time than people who cooperate and still have to be found guilty. Yeah.
How can communities build a rat-opposed culture? How can communities educate their comrades against snitching?
Yeah. So, as the National Lawyers Guild, we do believe that people have the right to their defense, to make their individual choices, right, with their lawyers, with their families. Sometimes, like I said, the dog walkers have no other option or no other knowledge, and their lawyers will advise that that's the only way to defeat this case, or there's nothing to lose in talking. So sometimes, yeah, people's individual choice becomes their legal right, and we respect that. However, a culture of non-cooperation might, yeah, result in stronger cases, stronger legal arguments. And really how you do that, it might sound cliche, but it is building community and tight relationships that will have consequences if you lose them, right? Like if you have a bad relationship with your mom and the government's like, you want to snitch on them, you likely might, because you don't have a good relationship with her. If you have a really tight relationship with your mom and the government approaches her, she'll never turn on you, right? Like it's just a human nature. We are communal people. And so if your community and relationships are really strong and tight and, not just going to the meeting, not just going to the movie screen, but like spending time together and eating together and having fun and seeing together at school and different contexts and celebrating each other, those relationships will protect each other. And um because that's becomes community, becomes family. Like I wouldn't turn on my loved ones, right? This is just human nature. Separately though, more broadly, I think providing trainings and workshops and panels explaining state repression and how the government functions and the consequences of cooperating, that might help people see, right, if they're ever in the moment of suddenly being in trouble, even they didn't do anything, this is the first time it's happening, they might have some knowledge to lean on to deal with that. The last thing I'll say is people who are incarcerated have more pressure to cooperate. This is just logical, right? If you're stuck in a cage and the way to get out is to talk with the government, most people will do it. I mean, yeah, human nature, right? Like trying to get out of this cage and this is my options. So communities building structures to get people out of the cage could be one of the biggest, fastest antidotes. And that means bail funds, fundraising, getting lawyers for the bond hearings, doing jail visits, right? Like all the stuff that has to do with the jail. Yeah, so those are like some ideas, but really even the jail part requires strong networks to build those structures, I would say.
All right, Javier, thank you for your time. Is there anything you want to leave us with as we sign off?
I think the reality of federal repression, right, at the federal level, has to do a lot with immigration right now. But on the criminal side, what's happening in North Texas with the prairie land defendants is where like the big resources of the government are being spent to prosecute people who, surprise, were in an anti-ICE noise demonstration. So for me, it's not an accident that where the government is testing extreme charges was in response to something that happened at an ICE detention center, right? The immigration of it all. And those cases, what's happening in North Texas should capture people's attention as much as the Stop Cop City movement did, as much as other popular political defendants have. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
You were just listening to Javier de Janon, Director of Mass Defense at the National Lawyers Guild. I'm Jessie, and you've been listening to the Socialist Rifle Association podcast.